This is going to be a presentation on why English is so messed up. You see that? That actually says messed up. You thought it was going to say something else. It's going to involve a lot of history, but it's also going to involve some discussion of linguistics because historical changes in linguistics are the reason why English is so messed up. It's going to be a quick version of it, so an oversimplified history, but it's going to hit the high points for you. What did the words on this slide teach you about the strategy sounded out? If a kid starts sounding out this first word, D-O, and they're using their phonics lessons, they're likely to say d-ah, because we try to teach the short sound first all the time. And they're going to say maybe do, 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 and you're going to run over and say, oh no, that's one of those words that you just have to remember, that you have to memorize. It says do. And so then the kid's going to read the next word and say sue. They're going to apply what you've generalized what you've said in this word, and then you say, oh no, that word says so. And then the next word over, you're going to have to come over again and say, oh no, S-E-W also says so. And then that kid's going to think, oh, then F-E-W must say fo. Then you're going to have to run over again and say, oh no, that's another weird word. And then if that says few, then why does this next one say phone, P-H-O-N-E? And let's just stop on that one and do a sound it out. If we stop and tell a kid to sound it out, they're going to think that we mean letter to letter, right to left, especially if we've taught them only simple patterns at the beginning, which is often the mistake people make in a scope and sequence of phonics, is to teach only the simple patterns first. So a person who's learned simple patterns only is going to take that word phone and say p, h, ah, n, e. If they can get them all right, that's what they'll get. And if you put those all together, are you going to get phone or are you going to get pahane, pahane? And I can't say that faster and faster and actually have it come out as phone. If I tell a kid that that word P-H-O-N-E then says phone, then the next word over, O-N-E, must say own. Which actually makes some good sense with the phonics, but then I have to pop back over and say, oh no, that word says one. So we have all kinds of words, and I'm just going to let you sit and look at the lists of words here and think about what would sound it out do if you looked at all of those words. One letter at a time, left to right. And that's one of the problems we have to solve, is that sounding out letter to letter, left to right, does not work in English except for a few simple words. What does this word say? G-H-O-T-I. If you take the G-H from laugh, the O from women, the plural women, and the T-I from nation, then you'll be able to see that this word says f from laugh, I from women, sh from nation, and that word spells fish. This is the English we're dealing with. Why is English spelling so strange? The two quick answers are 26 over 44 and the French. The history tells us that that's the answer. 26 what, 44 what, and why the French? We'll get to that in just a moment. (26 over 44). The 26 is for 26 letters in the Roman alphabet, and you can see that I have emphasized Roman there. Why Roman? Because the Romans conquered the entire area of Europe and beyond, and as their empire declined, the Roman Catholic Church kept Latin as its official language. So for hundreds of years, Latin and that Roman alphabet was everywhere, including in England. And the key thing that you need to think about there is this is actually the Roman alphabet, not just Romanesque, blah, blah, blah. We're using the alphabet that came from Roman times. So I just want you to spend a moment and put a picture in your mind, visualize a Roman. Do you see a person in a toga or a person in a gladiator outfit? I find that there are only two things people imagine when they think of a Roman, toga or gladiator. Whatever it is, that's what we're talking about. We've borrowed an alphabet for historical reasons from thousands of years ago that does no longer match the sounds in our language. We have 44 sounds, somewhere depending on regional areas, so 41 to 44 sounds. The important thing about that fraction is that it just doesn't fit. We do not have a letter for every one of our phonemes. Let's split the 26 over 40 out by consonants versus vowels. If you put an International Phonetic Alphabet chart out there and think about all of the sounds we have in English that are consonants and match them up to the number of letters that we have, you can see that we have 21 alphabet letters to cover 26 consonant sounds that we have in the language. You can see on this chart. The chart shows all of the different places in the mouth and the sounds that we make with those. The black letters are the ones that we have in English. The gray ones are the ones that they have in other world languages, but not in English. So for the sounds that we have a pretty good matchup of consonant letters to consonant sounds or consonant phonemes. Vowel sounds, on the other hand, if we look at a vowel chart for the International Phonetic Alphabet and look at how many vowels English has, depending on regional pronunciations, we have as many as 18 vowels in English. In Western American English, it's easy for us to find 16 vowels, including some of these double vowels, the diphthong sounds. But put all of those together and try to match them up to our 5/6 vowel letters, not even close. So vowel letters and vowel sound matchups are where a huge part of the problem for young readers and writers come from. And you shouldn't be surprised if many of your kids' struggles with reading words comes as soon as they hit the vowel. Time for the history lesson. William the Conqueror is our key person, and 1066 is our year. There's a great book out on British history called 1066 and All That, which is to say that 1066 is the year in English history. Everything changed from then on, which is when William the Conqueror, or Guillaume de Normandie, conquered England. History says that back in France, in Normandy, northern France, where he came from, that he was referred to as Guillaume le Bâtard, the William the Bastard, the bastard. He was a bastard son of the king of France at the time, and as such, he was kind of low on the totem pole when it came to talking about lands that you could go and conquer and have a place for your own kingdom and your future and so on. And so when it came time for William to strike out in the world, he was given permission to go across the Channel and conquer England, which was really the dregs of what you could get, because people did not make it across the English Channel. It was pretty much you go take a 50-50 chance of dying trying to sail across the English Channel, and if you make it and you can conquer that place, it's yours. So very colonial and imperialistic sort of approach to things, but he did it. It only took him a day to conquer England. Within a day of his showing up there, he had conquered the army that was there to meet him, and the Archbishop of Canterbury showed up and offered him the crown. So he did one of the two basic linguistic things that a conqueror can do, and that is either you learn to speak the language of the land that you have conquered, or you continue to speak your own language and expect people to do that. So what William, as a strong Frenchman, did was said, you all are going to speak to me in French. Now, that archbishop that offered William the Conqueror the crown, if we had walked into that cathedral where he was working that same day and listened to somebody saying the Lord's Prayer, reciting it or reading it out of the Bible, this is what you would have heard. Father ora du de erton heavenum, si thin name Jehaliod, tobe cumet in riche, jewerthoth in willa on erthon, swaswa on heavenum. Urne de huamlichen lav, sile us todea, and forgive us ure giltas swaswa we forgivet urum giltendum, and ne je leid du oss on kostnunge ac aliesus of uvela. And that was the Lord's Prayer. What you should be hearing is that English in 1066 was German. This version of the Lord's Prayer is almost identical to what you would find in a Bible collected from West Saxony or Anglia over in Germany at almost exactly the same time. So English used to be German, and it should sound completely foreign to you, even though you might be able to pick back through it and say, oh, that's kind of like our current English. You can find those cognates or the historical predecessors of words that we currently have. But what happened is that William the Conqueror did not continue to speak German. He continued to speak French. And so anybody that wanted anything to do with the court and the king, anything you wanted to get done that depended on business and legal and transactions and travel and so on, had to be ratified by the court. And so people who were interested in getting things done had to learn French. And they would learn French, they would go in, they would get their business done, and then they would walk back out into the street and start speaking German again. And if you have people that are constantly walking back in and back out of situations to do things, switching languages, switching from French to English, from French to English, and so on, or I should say from French to German, from French to German, after a while you start to get a mishmash of these two languages showing up. It takes a lot of time, but the language begins to evolve into a hybrid of the two languages. Probably pretty appropriate. It starts to evolve into a bastardization of the two languages. So what we find over time is that English starts to evolve into something new because of the influence of speaking French on a daily basis. Within a matter of about 200 or 300 years, if we had gone into a church in the 1300s and listened to that same Lord's Prayer, we would have heard it like this. Our Father that art in heavenus, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come to thee, be thy will done in earth as in heaven. Give to us this day our bread over our substance, and forgive to us our debts as we forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, and so on. So the Lord's Prayer had started to change already, and I hope that you can appreciate and hear that one of the key things that's happening is some of the consonants are changing, some of the vocabulary words are changing, but the key thing that's happening is there's a huge shift in vowels. So the vowel sounds, the vowel phonemes are beginning to shift because of the influence of switching back and forth between English and French over hundreds of years. If you compare both of those older versions of the Lord's Prayer to one from Shakespeare's time that just says, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, you'll get a sense that another 300 years pass, you have a completely different language. And our current language in the 21st century all around the world has had some sound shifts as well, so that we have accents in different world Englishes that are largely based on different pronunciations of vowel sounds. So if you go to India, listen to people who are native speakers of English, they pronounce the vowels very differently and run their syllables a little bit differently. Emphasis is done a little bit differently with stress and unstress in the words. The same thing's going to happen if you go to England or South Africa or any place else where English is spoken natively. So the influences on English over time have had a huge impact on shifting the sounds around. So if you look at English today, you'll find that nearly a third of the language is influenced by Latin. Most of that influence in Latin has happened recently, although Latinisms were a huge thing back in the Renaissance and Middle Ages. Most of the vocabulary words that are scientific and technical have appeared since the mid-1800s. And so that accounts for about almost a third of the words that we use. And just think about everyday words like produce and refrigerator. Those are all things that came from Latin. And so they're common words. They're maybe slightly more technical, slightly more academic than the other words that we could choose, like make or icebox. Those are things that we can say that are a little bit more based on the older English, but Latinisms are strong in our language. French, including Old French and early Anglo-French, accounts for almost another third of our words that we have today. One that I come back to over and over again is people. We spell it P-E-O-P-L-E because it's an Old French word. And today in France, the word peuple, P-E-U-P-L-E, is an existing word that has that strange kind of vowel spelling to it that they pronounce their peculiar way, and we have almost no way of explaining to kids why P-E-O-P-L-E says people, because people are like, well, what is the O for? And it's because it was an original French spelling, and we don't change those words after we've borrowed them just because the sounds are changing all the time. So often those odd spellings preserve the original spelling that was there when the word was first adopted and used in print. Old and Middle English, Old Norse and Dutch, those Germanic languages, those have all accounted for also a quarter of the language, not quite a third. But think about everyday words like water and farming words like goat and man and dog. These are all going to be words that come from those old Germanic languages. Anything that has to do with everyday things and farming things and the land and houses and those types of things, you can expect there to be a lot of Old and Middle English, Norse, Dutch words in there. Greek words account for about 5. Words like phone with a PH at the beginning, words like psychology, words like rhythm. A lot of our medical and poetic words that are about language and words come from Greek. And there are a lot of other Greek borrowings in there as well, but not nearly as many as Latin. So about 5% of our words are borrowed from Greek. About 4% of our words, we can't find an etymology for them. We just use them even though we don't know where they came from. Derived from proper names, words like the Heimlich maneuver, the Eisenberg principle, Occam's razor. There are little things that we say all the time that come from people's names that we've borrowed. All other languages contribute less than 1%, but that doesn't mean that those words aren't important. The word pajamas comes from Indian languages. The word algebra comes from Arabic. We have all kinds of words that we use every day that come from that less than 1%. But it's far fewer of them than the other languages. So you think about that. Those other languages have a huge influence on what our words are, and so the rhythm of the language and the way that they're pronounced comes from interacting across languages. So if a lot of our problems come from the fact that we're still using this ancient, obsolete alphabet, why don't we just change that? We don't have enough letters to cover the sounds. And if we're talking about how to teach this to kids, when I work with first graders and second graders, I constantly lean on this lesson that I teach called Too Many Sounds, Not Enough Letters, where on the board I put all of the alphabet letters and put some little icons or magnet chips or something to represent all of the 44 sounds that we have, and we work on matching them up, and it just doesn't match. And so we talk a lot, starting at the beginning of the year, about too many sounds, not enough letters as our key to understanding English phonics. So if it's just about the alphabet not matching up, why don't we just change it? Why don't we just sit down and crack out 15 to 16 vowel letters so that we can cover all of those vowel sounds? And we could do that just with dots, right? We've already got a dot on our I, and they use dots in languages like German and Swedish and so on, or little lines through the vowels. So why don't we just come up with a system of dots? We could take a dot and put it somewhere on all of our vowels. Suddenly we've got 10 vowel letters, and maybe we could be creative and do a couple of other things and get the vowel letters that we need. There's a vowel sound that's super common that we have no letter for. It's the sound in book or put. We assign an OO or a U in almost every case to that sound, even though those letters are already being used for other purposes on the whole. So we have sounds that have almost no representation. The most common vowel sound in English is the unstressed schwa sound, and we should probably call it the schwa sound, right? So we have no letter for that, even though fully 50% or more of the vowel sounds that we make are that in the unstressed position. In a word like independent, we don't say independent, we say independent. That schwa sound in the unstressed position is key. So why don't we change it? Key answer to that is that it would cost a lot of money. We would have to change all of the legal documents. We'd have to change all of the medical documents, anything that had a liability to it, all of the signs and transportation things that are so important for communicating. Those would all have to be changed, and it would cost an awful lot of money. Then we would have to train all of you as teachers to be able to teach this new language, and so we'd probably have to get all of you a 3-credit-hour class in the new alphabet, and I've done the math on that. If we got all of the teachers in the United States a 3-credit-hour class in how to teach a new alphabet, it would cost $7 billion. So it's expensive. And we're probably just not going to do it because despite the fact that it's a difficult language to deal with, people do learn it. So if we can't change the alphabet, why don't we just change the weird spellings that came from other languages? Just take a word like people and respell it. So pause for a second and think, if you were in charge today and you wanted to respell the word people, how would you spell it? Got an idea? So if you do that respelling of the word, and you might have said something like P-E-E-P-L, that still says people, right, without a lot of extra stuff, and we use the E-E to be that long E. The key is that that particular way of doing it isn't going to work for several other words that need to be respelled. And so the key problem is that we still only have 26 letters to try to cover 44 sounds. No matter what we do, we're going to be stuck with some sort of a doubling up or other option that's just not going to fit. So we're back to the obsolete and ancient alphabet again, 26 over 44. Remember that. That's the key problem that we're dealing with in teaching reading. So as I mentioned earlier, even though this system is seriously strange, messed up, the words are systematic enough that millions and millions of people learn to read every year. One of the key areas of stability is there's no such thing as a word where the sounds that you make are not somehow represented in letters. It's not so mysterious that you can't say, oh, well, these sounds don't even have any letters that match up to them. It's the fact that the sounds sometimes have letters match up to them in very different ways that don't seem to make sense. But millions of people learn to read every year, so the system is learnable, but certainly opaque. And opaque is one of the linguistic words that people use for our English orthography, our spelling system. And by opaque, they mean that the matchup is not 1-to-1. It's 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, 1-to-10. A sound can be represented in some cases as many as a dozen or more different ways. So it's deep. And opaque. So if you want to think about it as being like an ocean, it's deep, and the deeper you get, the darker it gets. Some languages out there are shallow and transparent. So if you want to think about that in terms of water, it's like that shallow lagoon that's crystal blue, and you can see right down to the bottom and see the sand and the fish. And languages like that have generally a 1-to-1 matchup of sounds to letters. Usually those languages are languages where they either have the capacity to change because they have a national committee that changes the spellings gradually over time to match the sounds and simplify things, or because the alphabet was developed recently, not something that was inherited historically. So an alphabet like the Finnish alphabet was invented by people who were able to sit down and say, okay, the language the way it is, let's invent an alphabet that fits our phonemes. Korean is another system where they actually had people sit down and invent a system that matched their phonemes. So we're stuck with a language that has an inherited alphabet that does not match our system of phonemes. So what are you going to do about it? 26 over 44 and the French. We've inherited this system. What do teachers do about it? I already mentioned to you that talking explicitly about too many sounds, not enough letters, creating a lesson that goes along with that is going to be a key part of teaching beginning readers and for teaching many struggling readers who haven't had that fair introduction to why English is the way it is. I like to get at how you're going to actually teach words over time with this metaphor of peanut butter. So what kind of peanut butter do you like, creamy or chunky? Stop and think about your commitment right now. And I'm going to tell you, for the purposes of this metaphor, there's only one helpful answer. And that answer is chunk style. Chunky, chunky, chunky. That's the way English words are, because only a few words can be decoded accurately by going letter to letter, left to right. We have to teach kids that English words are built out of chunks or groups of letters that correspond to groups of sounds. One of the easiest ways to do this for single-syllable words with young kids is to show them an onset and a rhyme. And an onset is all of the consonants at the beginning of the word, and the rhyme is actually the rhyming part. So in a word like phone, P-H-O-N-E, the P-H, the F sound is the onset, and own, O-N-E, is the rhyme. And you can apply that either to the sounds or to the letters in the word. So there are onset letters, and there's a rhyme with the letters. There's also an onset sound and rhyme sounds. So English comes in chunks like that. Syllables are another form of chunks, and syllables behave in very peculiar ways in English. So getting used to what the chunks are in English is going to be key to helping kids actually decode English words. And instead of moving letter to letter, left to right, being able to see the chunks and move from chunk to chunk. So a word that has 7 letters might only have 2 chunks. A word that has 6 letters might have 3 chunks. A word that has 4 letters might have a chunk for each letter. You have to start figuring out, how do I see the chunks, and how does that help me be able to decode the word? So why is our chunk style spelling so strange? Why do we have to handle things in such a difficult way for many kids? Key answers: 26 over 44, too many sounds, not enough letters. Why do we spell things in such strange ways that aren't easy to decode? It's the French. Hundreds of years of switching languages and mixing up French and English. Should we have a word for that? Should it be Fringlish? Should it be inch, or something like that? Yeah, we should probably have a word for it that's different from what it used to be. But those are the facts. That's the way things are. We're not likely to change the language, the spelling system, anytime in the near future. So we just have to get over it and start teaching kids to decode words in chunks.